and Rose Phillips Family Foundation. We have a pretty big group this morning, so I would encourage folks to introduce themselves in the chat, drop your name and your organizational affiliation, and get to know each other that way. So Northside Funders Group has organized this event to help other funders better understand the dynamic commercial property development, excuse me. The dynamic commercial property development landscape in North Minneapolis, and to introduce them to some of the local developers that are bringing properties back to life in this area. But now that I have you all here, I'm going to say a little bit about Northside Funders Group as well. So Northside Funders Group is a geographically based funder collaborative that focuses on the two priorities of education and community wealth building. As a funder collaborative, we make grants from a pooled fund and work to align our individual grant making dollars to Northside projects for greater impact. And some of the projects that you're going to learn about this morning have received funding from Northside Funders Group's pooled fund. So also core to our kind of effectiveness as a collaborative is supporting a culture of learning. And I'm sorry here, let me just hide that. Okay. And today's an example of how we bring that priority to life. We're here to provide a platform to better understand what is happening in the development and core commercial commercial corridors on the north side, and to glimpse the boosts and barriers facing development projects. As funders, the question for us is, what can philanthropy do to be one of the boosts for this work? What will it require of us? Northside Funders is a small but ambitious group. We welcome any funders participating today to join us at our next membership meeting in August and to attend future learning events. So why is NFG elevating the conversation about commercial real estate development as part of our community wealth building priority? There's a few answers to that. In part, it's the moment we're in. From Lake Street on the south side to West Broadway on the north side, there's a lot of thought and work and conversation going into how we can build back those corridors, but in a different way, in a way that builds local wealth and doesn't extract it, in a way that seeks to counter the harms of generational systemic racism, in a way that centers those who have historically been marginalized, and of course, in a way that supports viable, healthy, successful small businesses. So how do we go about supporting that kind of commercial ecosystem? It starts for NFG with listening, and Northside small businesses name capital and space as top barriers to achieving their greatest hopes for their future. So it's incumbent on us to pay attention and seek to find solutions to these barriers. I think we're going to dig into that very soon when the panel starts. Another reason why we're focusing on commercial property development is we know the centrality of real estate as a means of building generational wealth, commercial and residential real estate. But that generational wealth has only been built for some. Disparities in access to ownership have over time contributed to deep racialized wealth gaps. And NFG works with its members to identify and resource strategies to close those gaps. And finally, for NFG as a place-based funder that tries to listen very carefully to what community feeds back to us, we have a strong point of view that existing Northside residents can and should be co-designers of the built environment surrounding them. They know best what's needed and yearned for in the neighborhood. Businesses rooted in place, accountable to and dependent on the surrounding community can be strong threads that connect a community. With events like this and through our grant making, NFG works to make sure local developers and entrepreneurs are leading the revitalization of the North Side. That's my spiel. Welcome again. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Coco, who is the managing consultant for NSG, and she will take us into our first conversation.
Awesome. Thank you, Joel. Hello, everyone. Welcome to this event today. It's my pleasure to serve as moderator for the remainder of our time today. That will be split in two sort of sections. One is covering the 3,000-foot view, so the big picture, and then sort of naming some of the more specific dynamics and components that show up in the commercial real estate development field, and certainly on the North Side. And later, after a short break, we'll be actually talking to some folks who are developers or emerging developers, have ideas that are either in motion, ready to activate, or still in sort of vision and idea form. And they'll be able to share specific experiences about what's working and what's not, and what could we do differently. So without further ado, I want to introduce Jim Terrell and Felicia Perry, who are our first speakers today. When I was pulling this thing together, I'm like, there's no one better who could kick off this conversation. And the reason for that is Jim is here today he wears lots of hats, as y'all know if you know him, but today he's coming from the city of Minneapolis CPED, and he's sort of the guy you need to call and the guy you need to know if you want to get something done over on the North Side. And what my experience of him has been is that he lends himself as a navigator of, to be honest, some of the red tape inside the city. Hopefully we can say that. But also a connector to resources and opportunities and people, which we'll find out is sort of a huge piece, is who you know and who knows you. Finally, Felicia comes to us with also a wealth of sort of perspectives and experiences. Of course, right now she's executive director of West Broadway Business and Area Coalition, which has been sort of a central institution for over 75 years on the corridor, and it is showing up in some really important ways in the moment we're in right now. But also is, I would say, an artist, an entrepreneur, a resident of the North Side, and certainly a solid advocate. So each of them will be able to provide a unique perspective today on this conversation. So I'm just going to throw it over to y'all, and I'll let either one of you sort of start out. But I think if we can, maybe if you want to give a little more context of who you are, where you're situated, positioned in relationship to this conversation, and then maybe some high level information about, okay, what is the deal on the North Side right now? What has it been historically? What are we inheriting, and what do we want to do moving forward?
Sure, if you don't mind, I'll go first and get my comments out of the way, and then we can turn it over to the pros. Thank you, Coco, very much for the kind introduction, and I'm honored to be here. As Coco mentioned, I have a couple of hats on here. My name is Jim Terrell. I'm a program supervisor for the City of Minneapolis CPED. I manage a number of programs, and the team that manages these programs, including the Commercial Property Development Fund, the 2% loan program, other participation loans, the Great Streets loan program and grant program, and a number of other ones that are still on the books, but maybe not being utilized enough. I'm also president and chief operating officer of Fortis Capital, a 501c3 community development organization that's run by myself and Brian Smith, also the City of Minneapolis. I can't talk very much about Fortis while wearing my city hat, but I am allowed to mention there's a website. If you have questions, feel free to go to Fortis's website and have those questions answered. Coco asked me on behalf of the Northside Funders Group meeting today to give sort of that high-level view of economic development, most especially real estate, commercial real estate development on West Broadway or the North Side in general. And it's an interesting thing, whether you're talking about this year or 20 or 30 years ago, whether you're talking about 3,000 feet or right on the ground, right on the street level, the view is the same. Wherever it has to do with credit, finance or credit, we are at a disadvantage. There are things that Joel mentioned in his comments that are very apropos to every discussion like this: a lack of generational wealth. We start with a lack of generational wealth. If you illustrate it, we start in a very deep hole and or 20 or 30 yards behind the start line before we even get to parity to start off. And that's almost impossible in most cases to overcome that deficit. We talk about access to capital. That's a huge focus of everything I've been working on for the last 5 years, but it's a much broader definition of capital. We lack knowledge capital. Coco talked about that. It's sometimes who you know. It's not necessarily a nefarious thing to say it's who you know, but that idea of social capital, knowing people and taking advantage of those connections in a positive way, is a good thing. We don't have to apologize about knowing people that can help us get deals done. And so social capital is important. Knowledge capital is important. As a retired banker, I've spent years advocating for more dissemination of knowledge of how things are done. I've got in other presentations that I do a single slide that talks about the things that you have to be prepared to apply for credit. And there are over a dozen things that most small businesses would never think of. All lenders have their own requirements, but most would be disappointed if you don't have some or all of those things. And we start with one of them being a very robust sources and uses of funds statement. It's critical, and yet these things that bankers and economic development professionals take for granted, just like breathing, small businesses, new developers don't have that knowledge capital. So they are turned down hundreds of times, not because they have a bad deal, but because they have a bad application that doesn't properly represent the potential of the deal. That breaks my heart. If you're an honest, hardworking person and you have a loan application and you're turned down because it's a bad deal and you can be convinced of that, well, then the banker has done you a favor. Not really, but it's a good decision. But if you're turned down, not because it's a bad deal, but because there's nowhere near enough information in your package to make a decision, that's a shame. And that happens because of access to knowledge capital. Lack of credit, poor credit, these are all issues universally. But now we move specifically from business loans and other kinds of credit requests to commercial real estate as a specific thing. Joel mentioned in his comments that it is one of the biggest drivers to creating wealth. And that's true, whether it's commercial real estate or residential real estate. Commercial real estate in challenged communities like North Minneapolis has a specific series of barriers. Deferred maintenance for years, if not decades, if not longer on properties. Lower operating income available for a number of reasons. And that whole idea of what the operating income is once again one of the things that makes a banker be able to say yes or no. Sometimes crime or the perception of crime reduces the rents that can be charged, reduces the list of tenants that are interested in leasing space, all of which results in lower operating income, all of which results in an inability to finance commercial real estate in challenged communities. Go back to knowledge capital, the lack of development experience in the hands of potential developers. You've got families that have been involved in real estate development finance for 2 or 3 generations. Very often in BIPOC communities, we don't have that. And so we're starting to learn from day one, whereas others with experience and background and access, their children and their grandchildren have learned from day one how this all works. As a result of all of these things, projects in challenged areas like North Minneapolis struggle to attract stable credit-rated tenants. And that's both good and bad. Sometimes in community, we aren't looking for Starbucks or Taco Bell or whatever. We'd rather a small local business. But on occasion, there's need to have that larger credit anchor tenant to make a project work. And so in challenged communities, it's hard to attract those potential tenants. And so we could go on and on there and spend an hour talking about all of the disadvantages that are real or perceived in North Minneapolis and other areas, not just for the past 5 or 10 years, but for decades, if not generations or longer. And so it's no surprise that I'm going to say the most disheartening comment of my presentation next. There is no easy solution. These issues, some can be fixed by hard work, but some can't be fixed at all. We can't legislate or programmatically overcome bias and other things like that. That comes from the heart. But a concerted economic development effort that cares about creating wealth in communities, cares about preventing, to the degree possible, gentrification, cares about access to capital, all forms of capital, financial capital, knowledge capital, and social capital. If we care about those issues, we can at least make a difference, make a dent in the problem, even if it's one project at a time. And so one of the things that I talk about, like I said very often, is access to capital. When we talk about capital, I want us here, as well as every audience that I have the privilege of talking to have a much broader view of that word capital. Financial capital is one of the 3 pillars. That's debt, that's equity, that's grants, that's loan guarantees, that's capital contributions, that's in-kind services. All of those things that could add up to value or finance or cash in a deal. It doesn't just have to be loans. There are many other ways to look at it. And whether you're an economic development professional, a banker, or a developer, you do well to know about these sources of financial capital and to access them to the degree that you can. Knowledge capital, the second of the 3 planks, that involves understanding the tenets of financing, understanding things like loan purpose as it relates to loan terms, understanding the value of technical assistance and mentoring, understanding marketing and how important that is in some cases. Have a market study when you have a partially vacant mixed-use facility and how important that is to a potential lender. Technology, even things like supplier diversity as a part of raising capital, knowing how it works. And lastly, we've talked about social capital, the connections, the introductions, the people that you need to know to access capital, programs that introduce you, matchmaking, social programs, associations, memberships, cohort learnings. I see Lisk is on now, and welcome to our great partner. They're a strong proponent of setting up mechanisms for cohort learning, and so where you can learn not only from experts, but from your peers. And so those are also valuable solutions. The city of Minneapolis has been involved for a number of years in economic development, and it makes sense for government to do so. One of the programs that's been around the longest is the city's 2% loan program, where we partner with commercial banks. You have a need for $100,000 for leasehold improvements, for example. It's one of the hardest things to collateralize. We've got bankers on the line now. My old colleague from Wells Fargo, Patty, welcome. Good to see you after all these years. We worked together at Wells Fargo many, many years ago. But banks are often, as they should be, reluctant to lend very much against things like leasehold improvements because the collateral value is so poor. So you may have the cash flow to support a $100,000 loan from your bank, but your collateral may only be worth $50,000 to the bank, and they can't exceed that. That's where the city's 2% loan program enters in. The bank is able to make a $100,000 loan to you for leasehold improvements, at the same time selling $50,000 of that loan to the city of Minneapolis in a subordinated position. So the bank stays in first position on the collateral, the city in second position, but it's sweeter for you. The city's rate on that loan, or its portion of the loan, is only 2%. So the bank wins in that they have the ability to make the entire loan you need and has less risk because the city is taking a subordinated position. You get all of the credit you need. You get half of it at a much cheaper rate. It's a very successful program. We've made hundreds of loans over the past decade, since 1986, many of them to BIPOC businesses. But the potential that is the greatest for this topic is where I'll conclude my remarks, the brand new or relatively new Commercial Property Development Fund. I have the privilege of taking credit as the author of that fund, the creator of that fund, and it is indeed transformational. If you aren't familiar with the Commercial Property Development Fund, it was created specifically to fill the very large gaps in financing commercial real estate in challenged communities and for BIPOC developers such as here in North Minneapolis. The terms are outstanding. The city is able to lend up to 33% of the valid hard and soft cost of a commercial project, or 7.5 million, whichever is less. Now, by practical considerations, we aren't doing CPDF, that's the acronym, Commercial Property Development Fund. We aren't doing CPDF loans near 7.5 million, not because we can't by ordinance, but because we don't have enough appropriation of funding. Right now, we're doing deals between 200,000 and 800,000. The terms are incredible. 40 years, no interest, no principal, no accrual of interest, no payments, fully subordinated to any other lender, and at the end of the 40 years, provided you keep the property in your family, either you own it or you pass it to a qualified heir, son, daughter, niece, nephew. So you've kept that continuity in the family. You have built generational wealth. If you keep that property and use it for the same, generally the same purpose for 40 years, the city forgives the debt in its entirety. It may sound like a giveaway, but it is not. There is a huge public purpose and public benefit to this financing. We stabilize communities. We help create wealth in communities that don't have as much wealth. We allow the tax base to be grown right away, because many of these properties can be developed today versus 20 years down the road without CPDF support. And we could go on and on. Most importantly for this group, it is the most powerful tool the city of Minneapolis has ever launched to help the goal of creating generational wealth among BIPOC developers and in challenged communities. So in closing, we have budget available. We have a new budget that's on the horizon in the city council right now. We started the year of 2021 with 6 million. We've done 4 or 5 deals so far. We have upwards of 90 deals in the pipeline that I manage right now, people who are interested. We have another $10 million that's in the process of being appropriated by the city council right now. We are actively looking at CPDF deals to foster the goals of the Northside Funders Group and the city of Minneapolis of creating wealth in North Minneapolis. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you, Jim. So I knew this was going to happen. I'm trying to keep y'all up here, and we dove right in, which is understandable because y'all are in it every day, you know, and you know what the specific programs, the specific needs are, and really, really helpful information. So I want to turn it over to Felicia, and I just want to maybe pull out a couple things I heard among the richness of the discussion so far, which is, you know, there is power in this moment. However, there's a long history we're building on, right? And so I know Felicia, as we were preparing for this conversation, that was something you wanted to touch on, as well as this concept of there are some intractable issues, right, that we, you know, can try to design around, and some of it is just, it's culture change. And so I think if Felicia, you can speak a little bit to sort of the opportunities in front of us and the need to sort of capture the moment, and also think about the broader systems change that happens within the field. So I'll pass it over to you, and you can either take those or just go in a whole different direction. That's cool too.
Yeah, I'm gonna talk about roller skating today. No, I'm just kidding. Hey, everybody. Thank you, Coco, and thank you, Northside Funders Group. It's good to see you all again. I'm Felicia Perry, Executive Director of West Broadway Business and Area Coalition. To be quite honest, if you go to our website, read my bio there, I think that gives you kind of an idea of who I am professionally. As Coco said, I am a longtime Northside resident. I grew up here. I was raised here in North Minneapolis, and I raised my children here, just 2 blocks off of the West Broadway corridor. And So my own personal investment and the way you all see me show up in my work, that is very much a part of who makes me who I am, and my value system, how I move culturally, and who I consider my stakeholders in all of the work that I do. And North Minneapolis residents have always been a stakeholder in everything I do, whether I'm doing it in North Minneapolis or across the river in St. Paul. So I just wanted to kind of lay that basis as I kind of go into some of these things. So I really appreciate this conversation amongst people who have access to a lot of resources, right? And then you all have a network with access to even more resources. So the fact that you all come together in this intentional way around a community like mine says something to me, right? And then how we do that is says other things, right? So when I was asked about kind of talking a little bit about a high level sort of view of the business and development landscape in North Minneapolis, I immediately thought about some folks I see on the call, like Jamil's work, Kenya's work, Neon's new work, even other, I'm sure you all have heard some of these names, Ian Alexander, Shay Sandifer, KB Brown, who else? I'm trying to name some of the people. The point I'm trying to make is we have entrepreneurs and enterprisers who are now finding an opportunity to become developers. And that is not language that I was using a lot with the entrepreneurs that I work with, maybe 4 or 5 years ago, when I started doing this work specifically like with WBC. And so in such a short period of time, we're seeing entrepreneurs and businesses having to scale up exponentially almost. And as you all know, we're doing it with less resources than anybody else. And as Jim mentioned about like market study and things like that. So if you do that work, even work that was done 10 years ago around the market study on West Broadway, a lot of those challenges around vacant property, availability of property, the condition of the properties still exist. And while there has been impact over, say, the last 10 years around development, and there have been some positive momentum and shifts in certain areas where we're at a point where it's really viable for someone like a Shay Sandifer who owns a fitness, a health and wellness business, to be thinking about how she expands not just her work, how she can expand how she serves this community, and how she can expand her access to wealth building tools for her own family, right? And so those weren't conversations we were having a few years ago with the business. It's not in the way that we are, and not with like immediately after somebody's telling me that, I'm like on the phone with other developers or funders or whoever else trying to really raise these plans and strategies that are happening. So I wanted to be able to throw some of that out at you all as you're thinking about what sort of projects make sense and what really contributes to our economic ecosystem. So the challenges of availability and viability of property on the corridor and across the community puts us in a situation where our entrepreneurs and business owners have to pay more. It just costs more, and then they end up with even less equity. And when we're talking about giving folks opportunity to build wealth, yes, there is a lot of movement to give people access to ownership of the property. I think if we really want people to build wealth, we have to set folks up for success. They need equity. And the way that a lot of funding is happening right now is in the form of loans or a lien. So even like a forgivable loan is still a lien against their asset, which we know when we're looking at any other financing or anything like that, that almost prevents them from getting future financing. So should another pandemic roll through, it would be quite difficult for them to sustain or utilize their wealth building asset to see them through in the way that perhaps, I mean, to be quite honest, maybe folks in you all's family might be able to do, right? Because of their knowledge of how to do that, or their knowledge that like this building could help sustain my family if I knew how, if I knew like sort of those financial handshakes, and I knew the information and knowledge on how to use these as tools, to see it as a tool or an asset, and how to use that. So we want to position folks in that way. That's the reason why, you know, I'm taking a pretty clear stance around WBC's funding not being something that needs to be paid back. And as we know as grantors, and this is a newer space for WBC to be a grantor in this way, is that grant won't be $1 million, right? We just can't grant like $1 million. We can't right now just like grant $1 million, even under the circumstances where it's totally warranted, it's necessary. We know it's reparative for a community like this. And so when we think about these levels of what we can do, we have to think on the advocacy level and what we're doing in like the finance industry, because even these grants, they still trickle back to the banking system and how our money's being held and transferred between these different things, right? And so we can't just think on the level of philanthropy. We all have responsibilities in that commercial and regulatory space to also be advocates for this community and these businesses. And I see we got some banks on the line too, but we all know it's all connected. Like when those of us who understand the intricacies of the finance industry and banking, which is something I did for years before I did this, is I'm seeing in reality the negative impacts of the type of underwriting I was taught to do and the type of like risk assessment I was told to do. And I'm seeing that in the businesses that I'm dealing with. Like I already know that my boss would have told me like, yeah, that neighborhood, you know what I'm saying? Like, so part of what we have a responsibility to do is also elevate that in these other spaces that we are not, where it might be a little bit uncomfortable and it might not be our whole wheelhouse, but we know, since we know it's all connected and we're there, we have to elevate it there, that even there has to be some change. Like we get that people want to dedicate money to making a difference, and yet within that same system that has created the problems, have contributed to the problems, it becomes really difficult to change that, right? And so when I think about the things that like businesses are kind of needing, they need that experience, they need that institutional knowledge, knowing the secret handshakes. Also, we have, speaking of like market studies, like the market and even the narrative around this community also presents a challenge when we're trying to attract diverse businesses here. So even people within the community wanting to open a business or a brick and mortar are finding that to be a challenge. Even down to our community events right now, I'm trying to help some groups mitigate other communities not wanting to come and join in our community stuff because they don't think it's safe, right? Or businesses not wanting to come and open here on the corridor because of concerns around like nobody goes there, or you all don't have this, or those type of things. So even the infrastructure around the community matters. So when we're thinking about things that we want to invest in, I think that's important as well, because, you know, West Broadway being beautiful or Northside being beautiful, just like any other community, is what makes people want to be there as well, especially if you don't know a lot about it already. And then also, I think we have to really think about addressing the impacts of racial covenants and how that has put us in the situation that we're currently in. You'll find that most of the newer, really exciting developments are by Black developers in North Minneapolis. I know you all have like a BIPOC developer of color cohort with Liz and some other work that's being done, but very specifically, there are a lot of Black business owners, and on West Broadway, by the way, who are looking to build their community. They have plans, they have vision, they have community support out everywhere, and but they don't have all the resources, they don't have the equity. Some of them don't have the capital at all. And some of them don't have like the network and the secret handshake yet either. And so I think that's where like all of us on this call could really support. So I'm truly interested in, when we're thinking about a shift in like even focus, and like how do we get super razor focused, just like those racial covenants, right? That were very specific in who they wanted to exclude. If we shift to not being afraid to really be specific on who we are including, I think we can see an impact we've never seen before. I know it's Minnesota. I know we're scared to like just say Black. I've gotten backlash in Black spaces for Black people from white people for not including them. So I get it, but we all have to have the confidence and like really be sure that this is what we want to do and trust that this is the way to go. And so I really encourage you all to be paying attention to these Black developers in North Minneapolis and the projects that they're bringing forth. They have literally been the model. They've been the consultants on some other projects who have tried to use their language and their ideas. But like, if you want the real deal, we got, I see Jamil Ford on the line, like literally somebody who knows this community up and down and has designed, I don't know, a good portion of it beautifully, I might add, with the intention that like I'm trying to put into like this Blue Line project, right? Which brings up another opportunity for this community to experience development, transportation development in a different way. And so the last thing I'll say before I hand it back over to Coco is let's really pay attention to the Blue Line. And I think you all should be really preparing on how we continue to resource and support these businesses through this project across Northside, because no matter where that route goes, it's going to have impact. And how can we shape that impact in a way that Northside gets to have what it needs and what it wants and be able to sustain that? And that takes preparation on our part. And like now we should be preparing, right? So yeah, I wanted to offer that. And I don't know if I missed anything. Coco will help bring me back, I'm sure.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Felicia. Lots of richness between the two of y'all so far. You know, one thing I want to pull out, and again, want to invite folks at this point to throw questions in the chat, because we're really now organically just going to take your questions and keep this conversation rolling. So as that's happening, I just wanted to pull out one thing that Felicia talked about, which is this this piece about equity. And the need, and I'm talking about financial at this point, right? And the need for, you know, these resources to be able to flow into community without an expectation that they might come back to the source. And that, you know, that does feel like a unique position that philanthropy can step into that perhaps, you know, that banks just probably are not going to be able to do, right? And so I wanted to offer reflection on that, in terms of sort of how our intent and impact sometime may not match up. And we were sort of talking about this when we were preparing, where, you know, inside of philanthropy, like a growth edge and like a very radical conversation feels like PRIs. Let's like get off our assets and do PRIs. And what I'm hearing here is that, yeah, that is a tool. And is that really the tool that's going to close the gap that we're actually hoping to see? And so is that intent and impact really matching up in the way that we want it to? And what I'm hearing Felicia say, it's sort of a complicated answer because we can perhaps release bigger resources, but is the structure really going to work? And so I would just pose that back as a thought or question for funders to consider. So I'll, and then I just also want to point out, as questions are coming in here, this question about the light rail, right, which is huge for the North Side. And, you know, one thing, again, that we talked about as we were preparing for this conversation is whether it happens or not, we're seeing how even the conversation can have impacts on the built environment, where, you know, Harrison actually experienced lots of change when there was a conversation about the light rail going near that neighborhood. And so who's going to make Harrison whole? And like, what's the repair that needs to happen now we're talking about a different route? And so those are all considerations that we sort of have to have a long view on that. So I'll pause and Joel, have you been monitoring the chat for some questions here?
So Tessa, was it Tessa that just asked this question? Yeah, about Blue Line. Just asking for folks to update us on funding for organizing and what other efforts are in play to make sure that that development project doesn't displace and does great things for the North Side. I don't know, Jim or Felicia, want to comment on that?
Well, I love talking about the Blue Line with folks. So I'm the co-chair of the Business Advisory Committee, and that puts me on the the Corridor Management Committee and the Community Advisory Committee. There's a lot of acronyms, you all. And so what I've discovered is we know that there's like billions of dollars for this project. We have barely any of it at this point. And it is like pulling teeth as far as, what comes from like Met Council and whatnot. Like, so what I am finding is that we're super under-resourced around engagement. A lot of people in the neighborhood, and I'm going to say neighborhood because I make this point to talk to my neighbors each weekend about stuff at work, but like in a more casual way to kind of get from them like what's really going on. We all live near West Broadway, right? And so folks don't really understand what it means to have a light rail in North Minneapolis. And they're confused about the two proposed routes, what that means. They have no idea their power within this situation because it does have to be community approved. And we are WBC, neighborhood organizations are super under-resourced when it comes to like getting funds for engagement around this in order to A, let people know what's happening, B, and do the engagement in a way that is culturally appropriate and diverse enough to meet the very diverse needs of access to this information and understanding that the community needs in a very short period of time, because they need this by the end of the year, which makes me think they're thinking November-ish, so they can say something by December, January, right? And so there's this urgency there where we just really don't have what we need. Now, there's a lot of strong collaboration between like WBC, Neon, Juxtaposition Arts, and then I'm really trying to pull in ways to work with the community, the neighborhood orgs in order for us to do this, because we all see that it's a challenge. We all see that we don't have resources. Some of them only got $5,000 to do engagement, right? And how do we translate stuff to Hmong? How do we, we have Latinx folks in our neighborhood as well. It's a very diverse neighborhood. How do we make sure our Somali neighbors also have that? That takes extra time and resources. So those are the things we are thinking about. And how do we disseminate information and get people visuals that work? So those are some of the challenges there. Even into that, even thinking broader, like what happens before, during, and after, how do we take care? Businesses are wondering, okay, so what do my employees do if we have to close down? Like, how long is this gonna take? And will we have temporary space? Well, how do we get moved? How do we find that? And so organizations like mine, or like a Neon, or even a Black Women's Wealth Alliance, which interesting enough, becoming a developer and still supporting all these other businesses, right? At the same time, how do we make sure that those new developments we want are preserved? How do we make sure that we still get the Resolute? How do we make sure we still get the Zara? How do we still, how do we make sure we still get that if this route comes down West Broadway or otherwise? Like, will people still invest in West Broadway if it goes down Lowry? Like, so how do we make sure, and I think you all are in a position to take leadership in how we support North Minneapolis, right? And how we prioritize what needs to be invested into, like, quickly, and how we strategize around building over the next few years, and sustaining this and setting businesses up for the success of that. Like, what is it they're missing that like this other business had that carried them through? And so I think those are some of the things you all should be like really thinking and strategizing around. And of course, that should be informed by folks who are in the neighborhood. I think you all can even list off a few people now that can help you do that, but I really encourage you to start doing that like now if you didn't like last year.
Mhm. Yeah, thank you, Felicia. And, just to give y'all a peek into the future, we might be talking about doing a learning session just on the Blue Line because it is such a rich discussion. So look out for that, in the coming months. But we have a couple questions I'll just throw both of them out there, and hopefully we can get them both answered before our time is up. So one question is, there's such a great need for capital, right? And there's lots of projects in the pipeline here. So how do we balance, or what is the balance between sort of closing gaps for projects that are basically ready to go, that don't need a whole lot left to make the project happen? And what do we do, and how do we balance projects that are just getting rolling, that, have to pull it all together still, but probably deserve investment too? So that's one question. I'll let either one of y'all talk about that. The other question is really around business incubators, right? And like, are they useful? Is there a role that incubators play within the commercial and wealth building strategy on the North Side? So I'll leave that up to y'all.
Okay, I'd like to take a shot at the first question. And we've got yourself and Joel and Joanne and other foundation experts on that can back me up on this. Project readiness is an important consideration of many investors or lenders in commercial property development. For example, the Commercial Property Development Fund that I manage for the city, location is the most heavily weighted of the selection criteria. We're putting great emphasis on projects in corridors in areas that were affected by the 2020 unrest. And so that will score higher than anything else if you're on West Broadway, East Lake, or anywhere that was affected by the unrest. But financial readiness is the second highest weighted score. It makes no sense for the city, for example, to approve an $800,000 forgivable loan to a project that needs $3 million and only has $500,000 aside from ours. It could be months, it could be years before the rest of it is raised. And the problem that we face is similar to what I understand many foundations struggle with, is that they don't necessarily want to commit that 500,000 or that 800,000 in a grant or PRI today if it's the first one in and it's a 6, 7, 8 year capital campaign. And so it is a much bigger question of how you get the early projects started. And that's part of the knowledge capital that developers need to expand their knowledge. How do you get the basic financing? How do you get the prime financing? How do you get investors so that the majority of the financing is in place by the time you go to the city or to a foundation for a forgivable loan or PRI? It's simply the nature of commercial real estate development. Maybe someday there will be programs developed that take a more liberal view of providing primary financing so that a developer could come in day one. But I know that many of the programs that I manage will take a big risk, but not the primary lending risk. And so there's a need for that.
And then Coco, if you could ask the questions again.
Yeah, so all good. So the question was around, again, sort of how to balance whether do we invest in projects that are basically almost there, or projects that are getting going, and how do we make those decisions? And then the second one was around incubators, which I think maybe was answered in the chat, so we might not have to address that.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, as far as the incubators, I did type a little bit in the chat quickly, hopefully not too many typos, but there are, Neon is starting a food business incubator. There's, a BIPOC developers of color cohort where we have a number of our Northside Black developers a part of that. And those are all like cohorts. Black Women's Wealth Alliance has several cohorts that they'll be starting up. We actually kind of fundraise together to be able to give more businesses access to that program. And those workshops and courses kind of They also come with some funds and things like that. And these are all things that WBC has believes in and supports. And so in the way that my organization is approaching it is right now we do have a pool of funds that we're able to grant out and to put some intentionality behind that. So developing this, launching this pre-development fund that will give them that upfront like kind of equity, pay for some of those things that get them to the table so that they're financeable and bankable. And my answer to the question around like, how do we balance between the things, I would say don't think of it as balance. Balance is one of those weird words we use a lot of time in life, and it never actually happens more than just a moment, if you think about it. So there's gonna be like a constant shifting that I think you all will just have to be flexible to do. And I think when you're in constant communication with us, it gives you more, we can help you inform like what in that moment might be more to kind of shift some things. So right now, I do think it's super important that we both support these new developments and the ones that are like kind of shovel ready, I think is a word people are using, ready to go. We have to do both right now. We don't have enough on the north side. That's just a fact. We don't have enough, like we need more. When people are talking about, hey, what about this business? Like almost half the time I'm like, hey, well, we do need business diversity. What do we have as far as this? So I think we should be looking at how we determine the difference between when they go from like newer to it to like shovel ready. I think some of those things need to be defined also so that newer developers and understand where they fit into where you all are trying to fund. A lot of my conversations with folks, especially when they're looking for funds, is how do they talk to y'all? Like, what are they supposed to say to you all? What are they supposed to have prepared for you all? Because they feel like they come to you all and it's like, okay, either if they don't believe in me, the banks don't, if they don't, you know, like what do I do? So I think you all being clear in what, if you are determining like you're going to prioritize a certain one, like really being clear on what that is and maybe what stage you're at, maybe what things you have in order to be under that particular title. I think those things would be helpful as well.
Thank you. Thank you.
Seconds, I just want to say in full agreement
Real
with
quick.
Felicia,
Mhm.
pre-development dollars are among the hardest to get and among the biggest gap and the biggest need. It costs a lot of money to do a phase 1, a phase 2, to do renderings, to do site plan, to hire someone to develop a pro forma and other plans, a market study on the viability of a project. And it's very, very hard to get those dollars. So there's a huge need.
Thank you, Jim.
Coco,
So
just before we get to Betty's question, I have to give a plug here for NSG because one thing that NSG does as a group is we have made a number of these very speculative early stage grants to a few projects, and that can be valuable to funders whose boards maybe aren't going to be receptive to those highly risky grants, but through NSG, it can be a way to get that work done with a very grounded, kind of connected group of folks. So just a small plug.
totally appreciate that. I'm so deep in it that I'm not thinking, oh yeah, NFG does that. So yeah, we have just a few minutes left and we have this question from Betty that I want to throw out there, but also want to give a chance to Jim and Felicia to sort of maybe share some final thoughts on like, hey, if everybody leaves here today with like this core point or this message, you know, what would it be for you? So hopefully we can do all that in 3 minutes. The question is, I got to scroll back up here. To what degree does student debt disqualify developers in the making? And then your final thoughts.
My thought on that would be it doesn't necessarily disqualify. Very often decisions are made on commercial financing based on the cash flow of the real estate, not so much the individual. And in some rare cases, they're even non-recourse, or in other words, no personal guarantee required, so that personal credit isn't as much a factor at all. That's not in all cases. And so once again, that's part of knowing who your banker, knowing who your lender is. But a high level of student debt doesn't necessarily disqualify a good real estate project if that project has cash flow on its own.
Thank you. So any final thoughts here? We got 2 minutes and then we going into a little break.
Mine will be quick. Something I want to make sure that I drive home to everyone is this idea of like, how do we set these businesses up for sustainability and success? And right now in this moment, I feel very strongly about how do we get them into these buildings and ownership of buildings with some equity at the start. How do we position them like with equity at the start? Now, I'm willing to help on this pre-development side, but there's only so much we got and only so much I can give them, right? Like what else everybody else got? What other things can we create if it just doesn't exist? Like if the grant thing doesn't work, what can we do? Can we bang on a bank to create a whole nother fund, right? That is totally for high risk. Is there a CDFI that can do this for us? I think we need to bring someone in the fold willing to how we assess the risk also has to change. So I'll say that. But yes, get them equity off the bat.
My one takeaway will be short also. Never try to borrow money from a bank or other lender unless you already know the answer is yes. Now that may sound condescending, but the reality is it just means knowing how to ask the question and knowing when to ask the question. How to borrow money from a bank or another lender is a topic I could speak on for 3 hours. I've done it. I teach courses on that. We don't have 3 hours. I've got less than 30 seconds, but don't try to borrow money with an application that is incomplete. You'll guarantee frustration. Ask for it when you know the answer is yes. Work with a bank partner to see what it takes to get to yes before you actually apply.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Jim and Felicia. Appreciate y'all so much. Hopefully y'all can hang on the call, but we get that you're busy. So if you can't, we'll catch you later. So we are moving into a 5-minute break for you to stretch, do whatever you got to do, fill your coffee. We are starting at 10:05. See y'all soon. Hello, everyone. We're about to be coming back here. Hopefully you filled up your tea or coffee. We'll give it maybe one more minute and then we'll get rolling again. All right, welcome back, everyone. I suppose I should have said this at the top, but you know, I just my Zoom etiquette isn't here today, I guess. But if you want to have the speaker view, you know, so you can make sure to see who's on the panel, that works. But it's up to you, essentially. All right, so I'm just going to get us rolling because we don't have a ton of time for this next portion, and we have some excellent folks joining us for this second panel. So, you know, the way we structured this was really for Jim and Felicia to give us sort of this big picture conversation and drill down to some of the dynamics, the components that impact commercial real estate on the north side. And now we really wanted to put in front of you folks who are actually in that work day to day. And to the point earlier of like, well, how do we decide, are we going to invest in projects that are basically ready to go or in things that are starting out? We have the whole spectrum here, which was intentional. So they can speak to the specific sort of needs, obstacles, and opportunities that show up at different stages of development. So I am not going to spend time introducing everyone individually. I'll just let folks speak for themselves. So the way that we're going to do this is I'm going to give each panelist three-ish, and I do reserve the right to interrupt you, minutes to quickly introduce yourself, again, who you're representing today, and you know, maybe your elevator speech, you're like, what's your mission or what are you trying to accomplish through your project? So I will pick on Erica because you're right, you're right in front of me here, and I'll let you go first. And if you want to kick it over to the next person, that would be great.
Great. Thank you, Coco. And thank you everyone for having me here today. My name is Erica Coleman. I am actually co-founder with a group of individuals for Northside Investment Cooperative Enterprise. It's also known as NICE, and that is a play on words for Minnesota Nice. But basically, I have a background in real estate development, finance, mortgage, and I'm currently the Housing and Redevelopment Authority Administrator for the City of Bloomington. However, don't get it confused. I'm all about my North Side and my people. So just wanted to throw that out there, but really quickly in my 3-ish minutes, the project that we have in particular before us is a commercial property off of 35th and Penn that we have innovatively come together with the Commercial Land Trust Initiative, as well as Land Bank Twin Cities, to purchase the property, but in a cooperative model. And so the focus of NICE has always been and will continue to be for Northsiders by Northsiders, with a specific focus on Black, Indigenous people of color, but Black people. Because out of everything, we know real estate is the fabric of this country, and it has been the one thing that has been used to enlarge disparities, to keep people from obtaining wealth based on their race and gender, as well as just full opportunities to run a business. And so we look at the property at 35th and Penn to maintain the tenants that are there and give them the full opportunity to become owners by holding shares in the cooperative. And so what is needed in this is what Felicia mentioned earlier, is equity. It's starting out with that equity. And so NICE is in the position of having to look at getting a loan to fill particular gaps. which can impede upon the equity that our shareholders would be able to walk in with, especially those of Northsiders that are at lower income levels, because this would be available to everyone. So that is very brief and a high level overview, and I'm going to pass it to Jamil Ford.
Thanks a lot, Miss Erica. Jamil Ford here. I hope everybody can hear me. I am the owner of Mobilized Design and Architecture. We believe in bringing beauty, dignity, and value through architecture and design. I'm also the owner of Ideal Development Group, in which I am leading my first effort of the Baldwin Square development located on 42nd and Fremont. One of the great things about this project has been the opportunity to connect with the city of Minneapolis and looking at the opportunities of hearing the conversations and discussions around what the community wanted to see. And so the city of Minneapolis opened up a platform and discussion with the community to see how they could reactivate a vacant and dormant building that's been sitting not on the tax roll for many, many years. And so we went ahead and took the best and brightest ideas that came out of the community, which often doesn't happen within North Minneapolis. Oftentimes we have outside developers that come into the community and tell us, this is what you get, or this is our interest, and their interest is their ROI or their pocketbooks in most cases. With this development, I am looking for an opportunity to provide access for NDC, Neighborhood Development Center, locating on the second floor, replacing existing residential units. There's 4 units that currently exist there. But one of the high points to community discussions was providing office space versus 4 units. And so we took that into consideration. We'll have both private office space as well as a co-working space that was designated based on NDC's strategic plan on moving their efforts further in the northwest region of the metro area. In addition to that, one of the biggest and brightest things I think about this development was entertaining the opportunity to bring in a national-based restaurant. It's hard to describe, but in this platform, I'll just go ahead and state it. I'm entertaining Busboys and Poets out of Washington, D.C., which I'm currently located here right now, serving multiple purposes, both for the Upper Harbor Terminal as well as this project. With the development of the Busboys and Poets, we look to create an opportunity to have a safe place to talk about race, class, gender, sex, politics, in a fashion that really begins to examine and embrace one's differences. Black excellence means a very great, dear part of my life. Not only is it my life, but it's who I am. And I definitely want to embrace it, as well as embracing other people's differences. And so we want to create that platform by having a restaurant, bookstore, cafe, a black box theater that will have access both on the first floor as well as the lower levels. On the lower level, we'll have swing space or transitional space that will also connect to an art gallery, in which both the Black Box Theater and Art Gallery will have curators that are not only locally connected, but also nationally and internationally connected. I'm not sure where I am on my time, but I just really appreciate this platform because everything that was mentioned is very near and dear to my heart, as I mentioned in the chat. One of the big things that I am specifically looking to be, whether it's through architecture as well as development opportunities, is being the change that I have always wanted to see. And I think through this project, I want to make sure that we're having a project that's not an individual project for self, but for the community. Mm-hmm. We want to make sure that we have community impact, community ownership, which is not necessarily monetary, but community oriented, where it's activated through jobs, overall involvement, et cetera. The last 2 points is developing community wealth, as well as creating that overall community pride. But thanks a lot.
Thank you, Jamil. I'm gonna throw it over to Shay.
I knew you were going to say that. I'm ready though. Happy Thursday, everyone. How is everyone? Good to see you. My name is Shay Sandifer. I am the owner and founder of the new MPLS, Fitness, Wellness, and Nutrition Company based here on the North Side. I've been around doing fitness and wellness now for about 8 years. And I love it. It's my passion. I love to teach others about fitness, about nutrition is king, and how wellness, healing from the inside out is imperative. And with that being said, my goal for the next, I'll say 3 to 5 years, because that's probably how long this is going to take, right? Is to own my own business and building right here on the North Side. I, as of right now, have a letter of intent for a building. Should I say where it is, or should I not?
It's up to you. If you're comfortable sharing it, you don't have
Okay,
to.
I might as well. It is 2529 Broadway Avenue. And so here we are in this whole change in the past year. And I saw a need, and I also have a friend in the corner here, Jamil, that was pushing me to take this to the next level. And oh yes, I own a farmer's market. So I own the Camden Farmer's Market, the only Black woman-owned farmer's market here in the Twin Cities. Right now, it's on Saturdays from 10 a.m. to 2 p.m. On 41st and DuPont Avenue North, partnered with Salem Lutheran Church to hold that space. But I ran it and operated it on my own for the last 5 years. And so here I am now, a year later through the pandemic. And when I say pandemic, it's COVID pandemic for me, but also racial pandemic, and now how that has affected the Black community. And the change I need to see, and I need everyone to get on board with, is the wellness that we need. So this building will encompass all of that. It will have place for fitness. I will currently be a certified Pilates instructor, so this will be the first Black-owned Pilates studio in the community. I also want to make sure that we have a nutritious cafe, and that would be in partnership with my girls, K's Revolutionary. I want them to be a part of that. And then the healing part, as a life and wellness coach, I have another business called Let Go, Let Flow that helps with anti-racism, working with white women on healing with that, but also working with companies on the culture of how they interact with each other on a daily basis with everything going on. So this project would be called Let Go, Let Flow. That's the name of the building. I've already named it wherever I land, because as always, we have to inhale the positive, exhale the negative through all of this. And so my whole goal is to heal the community through fitness, nutrition, and wellness in one entity, and also have a farmer's market that can rotate throughout the year, that people have access to healthy food. And that's who I am. Thank you.
Thank you, Shay.
Thanks.
We will have a chance to swing back around, obviously, to all these speakers. So this isn't the last time you'll hear from them. So maybe I'll pass it to Kate, and then Dominique can wrap this part up.
Hi, thank you. My name is Kate Speed. I'm on the project finance and lending side at LISC Twin Cities. You know, we one of the things, and in general, we're trying to bring capital into communities where there's a lot of financing gaps. I think you guys talked about that in some, at least in the beginning session. But one of the things that we've really seen is that, you know, there's all that you've already heard about, a bunch of really great projects that are going on. You know, 30 years ago, it was the small nonprofits or the neighborhood-based nonprofits that were driving this work. There is a huge amount of work, like community development work, that's being led by especially developers of color, folks that are like living or working in the neighborhoods that they want to, you know, really make change in. And, you know, our system, the system of community development finance, and even kind of the public funding and philanthropic funding systems haven't caught up to that. So we're really trying to figure out how to bring new tools to the table for folks, like grant dollars, you know, like pre-development resources that may not have been there before. We function in a system that was really built for like nonprofit community development of sort of yesterday. And so we're trying to kind of innovate around those models. So and we can talk a little bit more about this because I want to make sure that there's time for everyone to introduce themselves. But there's a program that many of you have been involved in that has evolved around providing grants to developers of color for capacity building support and providing a kind of peer network and technical support system for folks. We've always historically done that for nonprofit developers. There's a whole bunch of capacity that's been built in the system, and millions and millions of dollars of investment a year that are flowing through nonprofits. So the hope is that in 10 or 15 years we can look back and say the same thing, like that there's huge amounts of money flowing through developers of color into equitable community development projects, that a whole bunch of wealth has been built in the same way that balance sheets and portfolios have been built within the nonprofit development system. And that communities are better for it. So I'll leave it there.
Okay, so I am Dominique Jones, currently the program director for the City of Lakes Community Land Trust. But some news that has already been out there is we have incorporated the program that I oversee, which was formerly known as the Commercial Land Trust Initiative and is now known as the Partnership in Property Commercial Land Trust, or PIP, or PIP-CLT for short. So I'm born and raised in North Minneapolis, grew up off of 17th and Russell and 12th and Queen. I always had an interest in real estate investment. My family owns several multifamily homes in North Minneapolis. Last year, my husband and I, we started a real estate development company, and I joined City of Lakes Community Land Trust over 2 years ago. So I feel like this is now my life journey is in commercial development. So PIP-CLT's mission is to develop or redevelop and preserve long-term affordable commercial spaces through community-driven ownership of land. We envision neighborhoods as reflections of the economic, cultural, and social life of its people, places that anchor, hold, sustain, and nurture the health and wealth of a community. We also envision neighborhoods where local BIPOC businesses, specifically Black-owned businesses, can grow and thrive. Residents claim space through decision-making power and ownership of land, and together are building a vibrant human-centered economy. We also want to drive commercial real estate ownership to BIPOC businesses through partnering and offering affordability investments. So we are currently working on several real estate projects in North Minneapolis, and we have partnered with Erica's organization, Northside Investment Cooperative Enterprise, known as NICE, and Land Bank Twin Cities to acquire 4 commercial spaces located at 35th and Penn Avenue North. We are also looking at acquiring 2 more buildings in North Minneapolis. Our goal is to acquire 5 commercial spaces by the end of this year in partnership with BIPOC business owners. So I'm really glad to be here.
Awesome. Cool. Well, that's our panel. So you got a sampling of sort of what they're working on, what their vision is. And, again, definitely invite your questions, which I see we have one here. Which is a great question. So it's really about this piece around supporting nonprofit developers and for-profit developers, right? And so the question is, is support for the nonprofit developers that can use the skills learned on separate for-profit developments of specific strategies that is being used on the north side. So I know this is like a rich discussion that we've had before around, nonprofit, for-profit. So I'll just leave it up to anyone who wants to respond.
So this is Erica. I actually have a clarifying question for that one, because I think I want to understand what the question means, because when I think of nonprofits and I think of for-profits in terms of Northside and racial equity, a lot of for-profit businesses or for-profit developers are Black. And there is this nonprofit space that is usually white-led that they come in and they're able to do the work and get the support from foundations, banks, government, everything, because they're nonprofit mission-based. And so I want to understand a little bit more about this question, because that's the first thing that comes to mind, is that the whole setup is off. And it doesn't feel like for-profit developers in particular are allowed the same opportunities for skills to be learned as nonprofit developers.
This is Marcus Martin. I was the one that asked the question. The question is in the spirit of capacity building. You know, I heard very early in the presentation that there's a lot of need for skills, knowledge, development, connections, and so forth. And I guess I saw this as not the only path, but a path. Is there a way that, for example, Black nonprofit leadership in that nonprofit can gain these skills, these connections, and so forth, and use, access some of the capital, let's say, that Liz just talked about, use that, but that also provides all of that talent, all of that knowledge that they need to then go on and do a for-profit development separately. That they already create that baseline, that basis. That was the intent of the question, but I can understand what you said, that may not be successful because of some of the reasons you said.
Awesome. Kate, go ahead.
Yeah, I would respond to this. I think, I think there has historically been a lot of folks have said, why don't you just partner up developers of color with higher capacity for-profit or nonprofit developers? And there's a lot of challenges in that, one of which being that capacity doesn't necessarily get built. Like there's a transfer of knowledge and skills it's like that either the bigger organizations don't have time to sort of put into the transfer of knowledge, or they're just in it for their own sort of upside and benefit as well. I'm not to say that there can't be fruitful partnership and that's not an option. I think it's just can't be the only option. And I do think it takes time and resources. And if there's an acknowledgement of that and additional resources, I just got off credit committee actually for a nonprofit to buy a property on behalf of a BIPOC business in South Minneapolis. And the BIPOC business asked the nonprofit to come in to buy the property and to help them with the renovation of the commercial facility there, the leasing and putting the pieces together. So if there is a desire and a strong relationship and partnership, that may work. So I'm not suggesting it doesn't. There has to be alternate strategies here, one of which is just supporting Black developers and BIPOC developers. And they can bring in the supports that they need to round out their development team and make them, create a viable development strategy, but we can't rely on partnership to get us where we want to go.
So appreciate that perspective. I might be putting you on the spot a little bit, but wondering if Dominique and Erica, on behalf of the Land Trust and NICE, want to speak to this, because this is a partnership, right, of a for-profit co-op and a nonprofit. If you can sort of speak to like, why did y'all feel like this was a good partnership? And what do you think you can accomplish together that you might not have been able to accomplish apart?
So I'll jump in from NICE side. NICE actually approached CLT, or PIP, okay, we'll call it what it is, PIP CLT. NICE actually approached PIP CLT, and that was really pushed by Araya Fine, who is also a co-founder, and I'm gonna throw his name out there so y'all know he's a part of it. But that was really pushed by Araya to reach out, partially because we have to compete in the real estate market. And so with a building going up for sale, this is 4 buildings with 8 commercial storefronts and 2 residential units. That's very easy for somebody who has the funding to be able to come in and snatch that building up and not have the focus to stabilize the people that are there and offer them the opportunity for ownership. The PIP CLT is a new innovative initiative, as there's nothing across the country that is quite like it, right? So Dominique can talk more about that, but really just looking at what are the options available to us to jump in and compete in the market, and 2, knowing that the mission of PIP CLT is to focus specifically on BIPOC-owned businesses or BIPOC businesses in North Minneapolis, with a specific focus on Black-owned businesses. So it aligned in the mission for our first project.
Yes, thank you, Erica. I agree. It definitely was a great alignment with our missions. From PIP CLT side of things, we do not have the capacity or the knowledge to do a cooperative. We are okay with a business that wants to come and own the commercial space, and we want to help and provide that affordability investment and partner with them to do that, and put that community ownership aspect to the land. However, a cooperative just isn't something that we are equipped to be able to do. And so Erica's organization and Araya's organization, that was a perfect fit because there's, multiple businesses and they were able to come and be able to put them into a cooperative ownership model, which still, again, got to the end result of what we're trying to accomplish through our missions.
Awesome. Thank you for providing an example to that question. So, I'm not seeing any questions in the chat, so I'll just throw out one that I had sort of prepared for y'all. So some of the themes that came up in the earlier conversation really spoke to, this conversation about the need for accessible and flexible capital products that probably don't even exist. Or if they exist, they're very sparse. So wondering if y'all want to, just anyone on the call, maybe someone who hasn't talked, as much so far, just so what that lived experience is like for you in trying to get your vision, off the ground, your deal going. What do you need to see happen that needs to be different? Shay, you want to go ahead?
Yeah, I can say something. So I've had a letter of intent for about a couple months now, and to get to the next level, but the purchase agreement has been very challenging. The owner of the building is, how can I say this in the most Minnesota nice way, is very difficult. Very difficult. We have all the proper steps in place. Commercial real estate agent Jamila's worked with me on it, and it's just can't get to the next level. So then you can't get dollars to move forward. So you're stuck between a rock and a hard place. And so as a Black woman, I don't know if it's because I'm a Black woman. I don't know if it's because I'm new at this development, but you can't move forward when you have companies like LISC and Neon that want to help you, but the owner is stopping everything. And so my challenge is maybe there's a suggestion or anything out there that can help me understand how I can move forward with this purchase agreement that's put in place, but it's this like back and forth challenge of how we can get to the next level.
Yeah, Jamil, go ahead.
I would just say, I think out of all of the different individuals in regards to panelists or developers, I've probably been hanging out there the longest in terms of getting the projects off the ground. And I think to Jim's earlier point, there's a lot of different things that need to sort of come together in regards to this, this whole ideal around like the chicken or egg approach. Which one comes first in terms of your financing, site control, different requirements based on the different sources of funds that you have. I myself, I've never had a lobbyist. I never had any support from outside interests lobbying for me at the state of Minnesota. I also knew that if I was to accept or receive the funds, that I had to have a specific portal and how that circled back to me. I started off with a request of $950,000. I actually had some folks, I won't say any specific names, but there was pushback that said, hey, don't talk to this person, don't talk to that person, don't pursue those funds. You'll never be able to do it. You'll never be able to get this. Don't waste your time. And despite all of that, I spoke to the folks that I was told not to speak to. I made the necessary connections. I was perseverant and did a number of different things. And quite honestly, I found out that there's all sorts of, it almost feels like minds are little displaced things that could potentially trip you up. And part of that comes from just experience in the development field or area. And so one of the big things that I've been trying to do is leverage other folks that have been involved in development efforts to not only get their background and their experience, but also to be able to say, you know what, I don't know why you're doing this to this project, but this is where it worked elsewhere. And so if it worked elsewhere, why isn't it happening here? And those are some of the things that's like the challenges that I've found trying to get my own project off the ground. You know, when you start talking about tenants, well, the tenant wants to know, hey, Jamil, when are you closing? What's going on? Just as much as another entity's asking for one thing, well, the other entity's also asking for things. And so it's a major balancing act. And it's nothing that's like in a straightforward, this is what you need to do approach, but a lot of it's hitting your head on the side of the wall, being perseverant. That social capital is very important. Having individuals that are not only raving fans, but sometimes they're haters. And the reality is, in both areas, you need that mixture. When you start talking about doing things that's not necessarily the status quo or the traditional means or methods of doing certain things, that also raises the bar for other people, other developers. It also becomes the benchmark when you start talking about this is what's expected in our community versus this is what you get. And
Right.
so we're working up against many different challenges and various things like that. But I honestly believe that we need for-profit entities, developers that are within the community that's developing generational wealth, not a temporary income or salary. We need opportunities to preserve a community that will spur out or push out gentrification. We need policy that aligns with some of those things. Gentrification, in my book, is not always bad. If we can find places and spaces for somebody like a Kevin Garnett to move into our community, then by all means, let's do that. We have greater MSP. They have multi access and opportunities to Fortune 500 companies that are recruiting minorities that are used to cultural urban environments. Well, what are we doing to create those spaces for one to live, activate, so on and so on in regards to those cultural spaces that we need in our community? And so anyhow, that's
Appreciate you, Jamil.
my soapbox.
I do have one thing to this, Coco, just really quick to this question. As I mentioned earlier about equity, and so the opportunity to utilize capital as equity would significantly increase our potential for success with our Northside cooperative members to directly benefit. So with that cooperative model. And so Jim did mention something about 40-year, no interest payment loan, no interest, no payment loans. That would be very helpful. And grants, I'm just going to throw it out there. Forgivable loans, if you will, would be extremely helpful, but that would be something for the cooperative in particular.
Thank you. So we have a number of questions and a raised hand. So before I call on, or I, have Miranda speak real quick, just want to get any other reactions to this question about gentrification? What are you seeing? What are your sort of thoughts about that? And then I'll let, we'll move on from that, unless there aren't any other comments on it.
I like to say something about that. So when I was going over the letter of intent and moving into the purchase agreement, that was the first thing the owner said, that he was waiting for the community to get gentrified. And so, and he said, not textbook gentrified, but how did he put it? He said that he had been waiting. He's sat on the property for 21 years, so he's in no rush. And so my rebuttal to that was, okay, that's great. Then if you really want to help the community, like you're saying, and gentrify it, then what you'll gentrify is dealing with me, a Black woman that's creating generational wealth and is right here and ready to make moves on a building that will outlive both of us. And that was the only way that he even came to sit down with me when I said that. Otherwise, I realized it was going to be a back and forth thing. But he's brought up gentrification a lot. And so when every time that comes to the table, it pushes that developer a few steps back. Because if you're looking for always, like Erica said, nonprofit or, you know, the white man to come in with tons of dollars, then we can't move forward. So when that's always on the table, how do you move forward? You know, you have to come back with something different. Like, here I am, I'm ready to do this project. How can you work with me? And so that's been my approach on how to deal with gentrification, because there's always someone with more money and corporations. But if we don't get a chance as developers, as Black developers, then we cannot see how Northside really needs to be gentrified.
I want to follow up to that, Shay, because I do talk about this, and probably am the lone person as the Black woman that says it, but gentrification is a part of the life cycle of a neighborhood. We actually all want gentrification. We don't want what Amber said, with displacement. And so Black people in North Minneapolis should be able to benefit from the rising costs, the rising housing prices and the rising costs in Northside, because there's definitely some inflation going on, without being displaced. And so when somebody comes and says, you know, I'm waiting on gentrification, you know, he's right. He's selling a property. He's trying to make the most bang for his buck. I had to say to Chris Webley, to Chris from New Rules, I said, you did gentrify, you know, that part of the neighborhood. And he was upset because he said, people were calling me a gentrifier and I'm not. And I said, actually you are, but you didn't cause displacement. And when I explained it to him, he was like, I can accept that. I can accept that I put something in the neighborhood that was needed, but yet I did not displace people to do it. And that's all we're asking for. And actually, I'm not even asking no more, we're taking it. So I'm asking you all to help, but that's all we're looking at this point, is that it's not a level playing field. The way real estate has been designed has been to keep Black people in particular out, and then Black women in particular out. And so we're coming to you and we're saying, we have all of these innovative, not only ideas, but projects, and not just projects, developments. And like Miranda likes to say, products, right? We have things that can be duplicated in other places or have been done in other places, like Jamil said. And why are you stopping it here? So this is, you know, it's a bigger issue as we get into the city and government and what they choose to support, which is why I love the position Jim Terrell holds. Love it, 100%. But I'll get off my soapbox now and we can move on.
Just jump in really quick and make one point. Is the timing in which we're receiving capital is also becoming an issue. When you're competing against, you know, right now the real estate market is very competitive, and you have cash buyers who are willing to pay above market rate for properties. But then they're also willing to close pretty quick. And so when you have those three up against what someone like what PIP CLCLT is trying to do, it makes it very difficult, because the funding, the capital that is out there for BIPOC developers through the city of Minneapolis, through other programs, it takes a while for us to be able to even get access to those funds and to be able to close in a way that's competitive with other developers. And so I would just say that that's just something that should be also considered.
Oh yeah, and last thing to what Dominique just said, because this was a fight. I came from the city of Minneapolis, y'all. I came from CPED, sorry. Stop doing reimbursements. That's what Dominique's talking about, where we have to front the money up front. And it's been proven that this is something that severely prohibits Black, BIPOC developers, homeowners, anybody. Stop making the programs on a reimbursement basis where we're scrambling to find the money to upfront the deal, and then we get paid on the back end. That's just another one.
And it's coming out of our personal pocket. Yes, not acceptable at all. So
I love it. I love it. All right, I'm gonna turn it over to Miranda real quick, and then and then we'll do some closing statements here.
Thanks and good morning. I hate that I missed the first hour, but I did see that it was recorded. So I did have a question about, and it's really for everyone, but specifically the panelists, about capacity building and technical assistance. So my background, I know many of you on the call, but I've spent 10 plus years as a developer, acting as a developer on the nonprofit side, and moved in the last 18 months over to the lending side, which has been eye-opening. And I've had the wonderful fortune of seeing and helping a lot of developers of color and new and emerging developers. But one of the gaps that, from my understanding of this conversation, you guys have already discussed, is capacity, and it's a very real gap. And so my question is, and this is the difficulty, is we're in a place where I almost feel as if we don't have time to train people in the way they need to be trained, that we are in a place where folks who have great ideas and great passion and great work ethic, because there's no shortage of that, and great intellect, it's like transitioning a helicopter into a fighter jet midair, without losing any of the cargo and none of the crew, is what we're trying to do. And so my question to everyone is, how do we do that? You know, as a lender who provides technical assistance, I get so excited when I see Kate on the call, who has probably played professional therapist for me more times than not. Most of the folks I get is that I talked to Kate. Kate said, you know, and it's for those of us who are lending in this space, who are really attempting to help emerging developers, is both trying to fund, trying to create new tools, but also trying to teach and provide technical assistance. And so I'd really like to hear from folks who are attempting this, who are in development or who are funding, are specific ways in which funders can help build that capacity. I'm seeing developers who are struggling to put together pro formas, who, you know, there are some things that we're trying to teach, but also trying to get your deal funded, you know, within the 90 days so you can compete, as Dominique said. How do we do that? That's my primary question. How do we serve you in that space?
I got a list before Shay and Jamil jump in. One, your definition of capacity as a lender. Two, the arbitrary timelines that you put on developers or the development in which it needs to be completed by. Three, going back to that reimbursement basis, like the money needs to be fronted up front. Four, guarantees. Like, I think we discussed this. Can we get a guarantee? And working in development in government and understanding that these big companies can come through and just sign a paper like, yep, this is my net worth, this is who I got backing me, we see a few names and we're good. Those are all things to help right now. And then lastly, a lot of the Black developers or BIPOC developers have a full-time job. And the reason they have a full-time job is because the opportunities or access to the opportunities are not there for them to commit the time that is required up front to get a development off the ground. And so there needs to be, I don't know, there's all this help that's come out of COVID. What kind of fund can we get through ARP, because I'm really stretching here, to help provide universal benefit payments to people that are Black, Indigenous people of color, that are new developers or small developers that are doing things to give back to the community? So that was really out there, but it's possible.
Take notes. Anyone else wants to comment on this? Shay?
Oh, I was just going to answer a question, but Kate, if you have something to say first, go ahead.
Oh, no, I was just going to say, I mean, for one of the things we've been talking about with the Developer of Color program is like getting your first deal done is a huge part of the game, right? And maybe that transition into like, I want to do this full time, like, or I want to make a career to build a development company out of this. Like, I would have said the same thing, Erica. Most folks have day jobs that are doing this. And so additional resources, either to slow down, take some time off, or bring on that additional kind of project management support. That's one of the first things that we heard, in what are the gaps in the system, is like, we're asking folks to do double duty, and along with all these other gaps and barriers in the system. And it just like, I think, Jamil, you said you do a lot of beating your head against the wall or whatever, like it takes a ton of like persistence and resilience. Well, it shouldn't be that hard. Actually, this isn't rocket science. It's not that difficult. And if we have the program structured correctly, and we can build the supports around folks that have the day jobs, but still have really a passion for doing community development work, like we can solve for it. Like the tools are there, like, and it's not that big of a reach. It's just, I feel like we've been sort of swirling in the question. We just have to really redirect resources in a way that all these projects that are right in front of you get done. And then everyone will go off and do their next deal. Like it's getting over that first hurdle.
I totally agree with you, Kate.
Yeah.
And I know that someone mentioned earlier the importance and the need for pre-development dollars that we don't really have access to as a developer of color, because we do need to build that capacity up front, and we do need to get a lot of that project management work done, but we're not able to do it ourselves. And then we're also not able to hire anyone to do that work for us. And so that makes it extremely difficult and provides another barrier in our way to even get started.
So I'm seeing Jamil and then Shay.
Well, I would just say that, you know, architectural drawings, I think Jim Terrell mentioned it on the first go around. If I didn't own an architectural firm, unlike Erica, unlike Shay, that's a big expense in regards to pre-development efforts. To be able to convey and share not only your narrative, but to back it up with renderings that shares that vision, that helps people visualize your concepts, your ideals. That in itself is a major endeavor. One other thing that I would just state is, over the last year, there's been a lot of different folks that have been wanting to help, but they're helping or wanting to help with the wrong purpose behind it. In many cases, people are trying to find ways of sharing or promoting their logos, their businesses. But you know, honestly, if people really want to have impact and support small BIPOC developments, you can do that in the background. If you're really authentic about your approach, it should be a horizontal relationship. It shouldn't be a top-down relationship. It shouldn't have to be, hey, I'm such and such entity helping Jamil, Erica, Shay. No, do the work behind the scenes. You can cover that stuff in your annual report based on those specific individuals that are doing the necessary work. And so, yeah, let's just be honest and real. Like, if we're going to be authentic in our approach, let's do that. Let's push individuals together to make the best and brightest North Minneapolis as we can possibly make. Why? Because when North Minneapolis is great, we'll have a great city. When our young brothers and sisters aren't killing themselves and accidentally killing our children, we will have a much better city. Hopefully, we will be able to take our city, a modern day Selma, Alabama, and begin to show the world that we are working together and doing something that's going to have an impact for many years to come. Now, hopefully, both through philanthropic as well as corporate interests, we can come together around some playing field. Right now, I know one of the biggest investments that will ever impact North Minneapolis is that blue line, Ms. Perry. We're talking about close to $32 billion being invested in infrastructure almost $2 billion in infrastructure, which is almost a 16-fold return for every $1 billion invested. How is that going to impact North Minneapolis?
Yeah.
Will we go through the same approach as before, or will we be very intentional in how we do the work that we do? If we do what we did before, gentrification will take the natural process, just like anywhere else throughout urban America.
Thank you, Jamil. So we are almost at time, and I knew this was going to happen, that we weren't going to have enough time. And I'm like, I want another hour. And they're like, we're not going to be able to do another hour. So, which is real. We all got things to do. But I want to maybe lift up a couple of things that I feel have come up that I think would be great for y'all to walk away from, or at least this is what I'm learning. One is we need to ground ourselves in abundance. I think we've had some questions that are either or, that are, what, you know, which one should I pick? Are we doing capacity? Are we doing deals? And I think those are real questions we grapple with. And sitting around this table, we got a lot to go around, right? And so if we ground there, we might be able to accomplish more together. I also heard that we need to wildly and radically redefine risk. And that what is the risk associated with doing things the way we've always done them? Why aren't we talking about that being a risk to our communities and to our future? We also heard about equity, and I'm talking, maybe we're talking racial equity, but we're definitely talking about money. We need equity from beginning to start along the whole development continuum, because that is the wealth gap. That right there is what we've been talking about generationally isn't there. And so we can and should stretch to meet that gap. And, you know, and thinking about sustainability long-term too. And so for in funder terms, I think about that in terms of like, how are we investing for the long haul? Let's get out of these 12-month sort of like frameworks and think, you know, this is generational work, right? So with that, I want to take a moment to thank all of our speakers today who were excellent, who gave some very specific action steps here. I also want to invite you. I'm hoping that this is not just a conversation. And I would invite you to follow up with me or anyone at NFG if you want to talk specifically to any one of these folks, and do some follow-up work. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Joel to close us out, and we can wrap up.
I don't have much more to say other than thank you to everybody who participated today. And yeah, we're ready. NFG is ready to partner with funders, partner with community developers, and get this work done. I think Coco's going to throw up a slide that shows when our next meeting is. So if there are funders on the call that want to join us on August 13th, come on by. I think we'll still be virtual at that point, but it'll be fun nonetheless. And check out the NFG website, and I think that's it. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you all.
Have a great rest of the day.
Thanks, Coco. Thanks, Joe.
Thank you.